Welcome to Everything You Need to Know About the Ascension of Humanity, the podcast where ancient wisdom meets modern science and spiritual evolution gets real. I'm Heather, an energy healer, channel, and spiritual coach with Divine Ascension Company. Each week, we're diving deep into the mysteries of human consciousness, spiritual awakening, and the profound transformation happening within us and around us. But here's the thing. We're not doing this with our heads in the clouds. We're bringing neuroscience, psychology, quantum physics, and cutting-edge research to the table alongside meditation, energy work, and timeless spiritual teachings. Because the truth is, the ascension of humanity isn't some far-off cosmic event. It's happening right now in the choices we make, the awareness we cultivate, and the healing we do within ourselves. Whether you're curious about how mindfulness literally rewires your brain, why shadow work is backed by depth psychology, or what coherence between your heart and mind actually means scientifically, you're in the right place. We'll explore practices like breathwork, meditation, and emotional alchemy, not as abstract concepts, but as tangible tools grounded in both spiritual wisdom and scientific understanding. And here's where it gets even better. In our bonus episodes, you'll hear from real people sharing real stories. These are the warriors, the healers, the everyday seekers who've walked through their own darkness and found their light. They'll share their breakthroughs, their struggles, and the resources that actually helped them along the way. Because personal growth isn't a solo journey, and you deserve to know you're not alone. So whether you're just beginning to question the nature of reality, or you're deep in your spiritual practice, this podcast is your companion on the path. It's time to expand, to awaken, and to rise together. Let's begin. Why do we wait for bad news before we decide to actually live? That's the question at the heart of today's episode. And honestly, it's one I think about a lot in my own work. Because so many of the people who come to me for healing are people who had to hit a wall before they were finally willing to look within. My guest today is Stan Gibson, motivational speaker, executive coach, podcaster, and author of Living a Rich and Intentional Life. Stan spent 4 decades in corporate America, including years making the hard decisions about other people's jobs. When his own number came up during a mass downsizing, he was at his desk the next morning at 8 a.m. because he'd been building his real life on the side for over a decade. What I love about this conversation is how Stan brings neuroscience and purpose together in a way that feels accessible for everyone. The science of what exercise does to your brain, the Blue Zone's research on why purpose is the #1 predictor of longevity, all of it points to the same truth that spiritual work has always pointed to. You have to know who you are and why you're here. There's also a story in this episode about a friend of Stan's who received a cancer diagnosis, 50-50 shot at 5 years, and the thing he said that changed Stan's entire career. I'm not going to spoil it, but you'll know it when you hear it. This one is for anyone who has been waiting for the right moment to start living fully. You don't have to wait. Let's get into it. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Tonight we have Stan Gibson on the show. He's here to give everyone a little bit of his story, and I'm really excited for him to share all of his wonderful things with you guys. Stan, how are you doing today?
Heather, I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing awesome. Trying to enjoy the sunshine while it lasts, as they say. So why don't you go ahead and tell everyone about yourself and get this going?
Sure, I'd love to, Heather. So anyway, thanks for having me on. I'm always just a lot of humility, gratitude. Thanks for having me as a guest. As far as my story, I certainly don't want to take you back too far, but I would say, you know what? I was one of those guys that spent a lot of time in corporate America. Spent about 4 decades, actually. And, sometimes things don't always end when you're ready for them to. And for me, they ended about 5 years ago. And it was at a time when there's a lot of downsizing and things like that. And well, I was just talking to somebody earlier today about that experience because I said, it was such an amazing day because the changes are going to happen. And I was with Fortune 150, and it was very huge. And they were, basically making changes to about 40,000 people. And hey, you know what? I had made those decisions on other people for years. So you know what? My number came up, and that's okay. Because you know what? I had been working on a plan B for probably 10 to 15 years. And while everybody else was upset, I always say that, that was February 21st, 2021. I was at work the next morning at 8 o'clock. I'd already been doing motivational speaking, for the last 8 to 9 to 10 years. I had already been coaching, doing executive coaching with clients before and after work because it was just a passion of mine. I
Hmm.
had already been never let a good pandemic go to waste. I started writing a book, and people said, you speak all the time. Where can we get this? Where can we get your book? And I said, I don't have a book. So again, my mom said, God, I would always love to just have a book I could show my friends. And you know how that goes. Mothers are so proud of you. And so I made a deadline with myself to give her one for Christmas that year. And so I finished it about 2 weeks in advance. And of course, COVID hit. I couldn't go see her, so she had to get it in the mail. But I just had all the elements of my business going. So I was like excited at 8 o'clock the next morning when Stan Gibson Speaks was ready to rock and roll. And I didn't have time to have a pity party. So anyway, that's a lot of my story. And I've loved it ever since.
That's amazing. It's so crazy how the pandemic has changed so much. Just, I mean, between working remotely and giving people the motivation to like leave their jobs that are not in alignment and to just start doing something that makes them happy. That's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. The one thing, so when I work with clients, we give them assessments. In one of the assessments, because I'm such a big believer, Heather, you know who you are, know who you're not, and just make sure that you've got great self-awareness. And one of the one of the assessments is Clifton Strength Finders. And for those of you that don't know, there's 34 strengths. You wake up with five every morning, jump in that swim lane and don't leave it because it's where God kind of, positioned you. And the thing about that is that, with COVID, if you took that assessment before COVID, we asked you to take it again. COVID had that big of an adjustment on people to
Hmm.
where it really, your third strength didn't go to your 32nd. But on the other hand, it did kind of rearrange the top 10 and maybe the top 15. So it had a big devastating effect on everybody.
Yeah. Wow. I knew it had a big effect, but that's when you put numbers to it like that, it's wow. And what did you find was the most common change in people when they took these tests before and after COVID?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for a lot of people, they had a different perspective on life. It depends on who you are. For example, like I'm a guy that needs a lot of, human interaction. And when you go through COVID and your interaction is on a screen, it's going to change you.
Hmm.
It's going to definitely have an effect on you. And so I think that, it's different for everybody. And, some people had harder times adjusting to it. But it was just is really kind of person specific as to how they're wired and how they dealt with the isolation, how they dealt with anxiety. A lot of it, because I really get into my coaching is a lot around three different areas. It's the neuroscience and all the geeky stuff around, you know, emotional intelligence and everything that involves, the self-awareness, team awareness. The second leg of the stool is well-being. And again, all of the how the brain works, when we eat, when we exercise, when we meditate, so I love that stuff. And then the third piece is around productivity and with digital dementia and all the things that we have distracting us in today, how can you kind of flip that switch and be more productive in a very much of a digital world? So to answer your question, very different for everybody as to how they changed from COVID, given their emotional intelligence, giving their well-being, and giving their productivity. And I think a lot of people hit a reset button, and it's been kind of exciting to watch.
Hmm. I know I definitely talk to my cats a lot more since then.
And do they talk back?
They are very chatty, yes. I don't know what they're saying, but they certainly are very chatty. Yeah, it was just me and the cats for 2.5 months, and I was not spending much time, talking to people on the screen, like once a week. But me and my friends would get together and drink some shots and celebrate whatever. But but yeah, it definitely did do a lot of, I don't want to say damage because that's not the right word, but it did change a lot of things. I know getting back into that social aspect of life after the quarantine was over, I had a hard time just even going to the grocery store and dealing with people. But it wasn't because of dealing with people. It was just because people had changed so much over that time period. It was an adjustment just to even be in a social setting with people. But yeah, it really did do a number on people, I think. And so let's get to your coaching. What's your favorite part about motivational speaking and about helping people come to these realizations with their well-being and the neuroscience, emotional intelligence? All of that's very important stuff.
Well, Heather, it's just when you see people go through transformation, I was called right before the holidays by she has become a client since then, but she said she needed a career change because she just things weren't going well, and she'd been there for 20 years, and just had all this anxiety around her career. And so we started talking a little bit, and the more we talked, the more I started to ask questions, and it became apparent to me it wasn't the career that was giving her a lot of anxiety. It was the fact that she wasn't spending enough time on herself.
Hmm.
And it was the fact that when I asked her, I said, what are the five most important things in your life? And, everybody can do that. They typically start off with family or faith or, and then they kind of go down the list and, work is always at the end. And then when you say, well, where are you spending the most energy? And it's almost always in verse. I mean, work is taking up, 80% of their time. Kids are like sometimes second and, spouse is fourth and faith is, the last. And, when they start to look at it like that, then they start to realize that they're out of balance. And so when you can start to say, you know what, let's just start with the basics. I always say that you've got to be a little selfish to be a servant leader. And by that, I mean, you've got to take care of you. If you're not up there, when I speak a lot, I will put my five up on the stage. And I always, I let them know my little love story. I've been married for 43 years, met my wife in third grade. So, it's,
Wow.
everybody gets to ooh and ah about that. And then but I always say, my faith is his first and foremost. That is. And I said, who or what do you think is number two? And, people from the audience will say, well, your wife. And I'll say, oh no, oh no, she's number three. She's number three. But I'll tell you what, I'm number two. And I'm not being selfish when I say that. I'm saying that because if I don't take care of me, I don't have the energy to give my best to her, to give my best to everybody else, to be a servant leader. And my wife's had,
Absolutely.
I really found this out. I think, it made for a great, part of my keynote speech. But then when my wife came down she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer about 8 years ago, then it became even more accentuated that, while it's all about her, I have to wake up a little earlier. I have to create new routines so that I make sure that by, 6:30 or 7, I'm wiring and firing. I mean, I've got the prefrontal cortex, I've got the hippocampus, I got all the things in my brain that are just like, I'm ready. I'm ready to take care of her. I'm ready to take on, a lot of the obligations that I have at work. I'm ready. And so that's what I was teaching this client is you got to take care of you. We've got to rethink some things here or we'll never get to the career aspiration part of it. So it's transformation. Watching people take a step back, getting to know who they really are, and getting to incorporate habits and routines and learning how their body works, learning how their mind works. I just love it. I love to see people that are tearful when our journey comes to an end.
Mhm. Yeah, watching people go through those changes is truly amazing. That's one of the things that I love about my job as well. And seeing their face light up when they realize like different things that they didn't connect before. And I always say, like, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to make sure that you're taken care of, or like you said, you don't have the energy to take care of anyone else, especially if you're in a relationship or you have coworkers or, kids or whatever. But making sure that you are taken care of is so important, and being self-aware and watching people discover who they are. It's like when you get out of a relationship, it's so easy to lose yourself in that relationship and forget who you are deep down. So when you don't have that anymore, and you get to go out and figure out what makes, you laugh, what brings you joy, what do you enjoy doing outside of all of these functions that we have, like work and being a parent or whatever, and just seeing the face light up, and just, yes, that's one of my favorite
You,
parts too.
you're so right on that. The one story when I was in the corporate world, I worked for a guy who was really he was a very, very strong leader. He, was very unconventional. He had, very long hair. He was well in his 60s, maybe going to 70, but still had, very long hair, ponytail type guy and beard and just kind of this Van Gogh type guy. But, when he was retiring, I said, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "I'm going to take 6 months to find my soul." I
Good for
just
him.
started, I started laughing. I've never heard it put like that. But
Yeah.
I waited for 6 months and I talked to him and he said, "Yeah, now I'm back to being," his name is Bob. He said, "Now I'm back to being Bob. I'm back to the guy that I knew years ago." And so, that was something that I was looking forward to doing was, yeah, getting out of kind of, pleasing others and getting to a point where you can find your soul again. And I think that that's really important. I don't think we have to wait to leave the corporate world. I don't think we have to wait for a time in life to do that. I think we can, I think if we just get some guidelines and some guardrails, I think we can do that no matter the season of life you're in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel the sooner that you do it, the longer of a journey you have, because we're always changing, we're always adapting, we're always growing. And these lessons that we go through in life, these obstacles and challenges, are really when you get to see who you truly are and what you're capable of. And every moment we're changing with the decisions that we make, the experiences that we have. So even if you start early and figure out who that is, it's always constantly going to be changing and growing with you. And it's such a fun adventure. It's such a good journey.
Yeah, I've got a client that is going through some very hard times right now, and unfortunately, AI hacked his company, and it's just having some devastating effects for him and his company, and what the future holds. And so, right before the holidays, I sent him a coin, and it's a Greek coin. If you follow the Stoics at all, there is a saying that the obstacle is the way.
Hmm.
And to your point, Heather, you'll always have obstacles, always. No matter your faith, and in the Bible, it says not if you have struggles, it's when,
Hmm.
and you will then be led to perseverance and into this hope and into this faith. And so I sent him that coin. The obstacle is the way, because while he's in his mid 40s, I told him his life's only halfway through, possibly. You're going to have many more obstacles, and they're going to teach you something at every turn in your life. And if they don't, you haven't made enough left turns in life. So anyway, it's very true.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what kind of stages do you speak on when you do your motivational speaking? Tell me a little bit more about that part.
Yeah, so I tell you what, it's where I come alive. I just love doing it. It's something that I've probably been doing, in some way, shape, or form, probably for 20 years. But I get requests from all over. It can be, stages of, 50 to stages of 500 to 1,000. And I still bring the same energy because it's just kind of how I'm wired. But, I'm a storyteller, and I think people love to hear stories. And
Hmm.
even though I get into the science and I get into all the stuff, I have a couple of stories depending on the audience that I lead with, but one of them has to do with why I even got into this business, and it's I had my wife and I have a very, very, very close friend, and he and his wife, and it was about I think 12, 13 years ago now, and we saw him, and we hadn't seen him in a while, and he was a good friend, but we just hadn't connected. And he came over and, we saw him at a dinner and he came over and it was just nice to see him. We spent that chit chat for 5 minutes and he walked away and, hey, we got to get together. Yeah. And then about 5 minutes later, he comes back over and he says, Stan and Sharon, he said, I just feel like I should tell you this. And he said, but I've got cancer. And he said, I've got a 50-50 shot of living for 5 years. And, what do you say when somebody says that?
Right.
Your jaw drops, you feel so awkward. And before I could do anything, and his name's Jerry. And Jerry said, no, 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 no. I didn't come over to make you feel bad. While I wish I didn't have the diagnosis, I will tell you that the last 90 days has been probably some of the best 90 days of my life. And he kind of leaned in and he said, when death becomes certain, life becomes rich. When
Hmm.
death becomes certain, life becomes rich. He said, I'm having conversations with my wife that, we've never had before. And he said, my kids, I took them on vacation and I spent separate time with each of them saying, what do you want from dad before he ever leaves this world? And he went through and he said, and he's the CEO of a wealth management company. And he went back and he resigned his position and became chairman of the board and put more qualified people into the CEO position so he could spend more time enjoying life. And, when I asked he and his wife, I said, well, what are you doing with some of this free time? And it's kind of funny because I'll put the pictures up on the stage when I'm speaking. But he said, I always wanted to learn to draw. And he said, I could draw stick figures, but then all of a sudden I said, do you have any pictures? And Heather, I'm telling you what, to me, I'm not a aficionado of paint, but he showed me the pictures. And one of them was of his granddaughter. The other one was of his father, brother, and nephew in front of an American flag. And these were, to me, were like professional. And I just it just became very apparent that when death becomes certain, life becomes rich. He was living a rich life. He was painting with an instructor on Wednesdays, having a glass of wine with three other friends who had similar diagnoses. And, fortunately, that was 12, 13 years ago. And I actually just had Jerry on my own podcast, the Inspiration Podcast with Stan, but I had him on for the 20th episode. And we got to talk about it. And it was such a great conversation. But that's that was such a powerful story. And when you ask me what do I speak about, yeah, I love to talk about life. I love to talk about inspiration. And why do we wait to get bad news before we decide to take care of ourselves? So, we'll talk a lot about, what are the right ways to get, sleep? What are the right ways to take care of yourself? And what does it do to the body? What does it do to the brain? When we exercise, and how does that prepare you for the day? And all those kind of things. So I try to make it storytelling, but yet I want people to walk out of there with some really good nuggets.
Hmm.
And typically I'll sign books. So I did write a book called Living a Rich and Intentional Life. And so a lot of people have interest in that. I think everybody wants to learn. And again, that title came from that conversation with Jerry. And how to lead and live a rich and intentional life. That's where that came from.
It's amazing. That's an amazing story too. And it's a shame that, like you said, sometimes it takes a diagnosis like that for people to really have these shifts in their perspectives and appreciate life more and find those rich moments. And you don't have to wait for something like that. Like why not start now? Life is truly amazing. There's so many things to see, so many things to experience, so many people to meet. Like, I don't know.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. Not to geek out here, but again, that's where I go back to, the parts of the brain. The more you sweat, and I'm not talking about having to go out running a marathon. I'm talking about just, getting your heart rate up, 4 to 5 times a week. The more you do that, our brain is made to grow. I don't care. I mean, even in people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, they think, oh, I'm on the decline. That's not true. The more
Hmm.
we sweat, the more we have a chemical makeup in our mind that can penetrate into below a barrier of kind of a blood vessel line, and it enters into parts of the brain called the hippocampus, and then all of a sudden, we start to release dopamine, we start to release serotonin, we start to release noradrenaline, and this thing called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's called BDNF, and that is what causes neurogenesis. That's what causes our brain to grow. We're never too old to grow, Heather. So that is a big key for me is, keep active. are you familiar with the Blue Zone?
No, and I don't know if my listeners will be either. So why don't you go
Okay.
ahead and explain?
So the Blue Zone, it's a great book by Dan Buettner. And I even talk about that sometimes in my keynote. But Dan Buettner, he started doing some research years ago, and he wanted to find out where in the world do people live past 100 in really good health. And so after his research, he came up with five different areas. He came up with Okinawa in Japan. He came up with two areas, one in Greece and one in Italy. He came up with Loma Linda, California, of all places. And he came up with a fifth in Costa Rica. And
Wow.
when he came up with these five locations, the research was amazing because even though you might eat something different if you're in Okinawa, you're going to have sushi or you're going to have something, but they're going to have sake, which is one good thing. They do like a little bit of alcohol with their meal. But it isn't the fact that it's different food, it's the fact that they eat sensibly. And the number one, they had nine things in common. These five places, they had nine things in common. And the first one above all else was purpose. And in Japan, it's called Ikigai, which is a reason to wake up in the morning. In Costa Rica, it's called Plana de Verde, which is same thing. It's kind of a reason to wake up or having a purpose in life. But these it's the same thing. Loma Linda, California. How do you pick that? Well, it's very big in Seventh Adventist Christians, and so they live according to biblical principles. So they live their purpose, but they also eat according to a healthy diet based out of, biblical principles that they believe in. They believe in community. There's just of these nine things. This is called the Blue Zone. And throughout the United States right now, more and more blue zones are popping up all over the United States and throughout the world. And it's because of this work that Dan Buettner did. And a lot of it is, city councils are adopting blue zone communities. And so they're creating more bike paths, they're creating more walking paths, they're creating different variations at grocery stores for people to eat healthier. So they're doing these things to help people live healthier and longer. So that's what the blue zone is. And I just find that very interesting
Yeah.
that, again, purpose is that first and foremost.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I might have to look into that. And that sounds very interesting. Wow.
And if you like, tell you what, just if you like to read, that's one thing. If you like to see it on YouTube or several documentaries called The Blue Zone, I think they might be on Netflix. You'd have to look up which streaming they're on. But Dan Buettner's done multiple documentaries on it, and there's a good one. I just can't remember which streaming it's on because it's been a while since I've watched it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll look into that for sure. Awesome. So why don't you go ahead and share with us any projects that you're working on and let us know about that book title again so we can check that out.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm making an exciting pivot right now for me. I've always kind of worked on my own, but I'm going to work with two really cool guys that they do consulting, but the pieces they do. They want somebody who's going to build community. They want somebody who's going to build masterminds. They want somebody who's going to come in and that loves to podcast. And so it's called Thrive CXO, but I'm going to start pivoting with them. I'm really excited about it. But I'll tell you what, if you wanted to get a hold of me and you did, that's I'm making that transition, but I tell you what, I still have, it's called leadwithstan.com, leadwithstan.com. And what you do if you go there, I'm going to give you two things. Number one, I'm going to give you a PDF that's going to be a great guideline for all of the neuroscience and resources around sleep, around nutrition, around exercise, around meditation. It's only 2 pages. It's very easy to read, but you're going to love it. And that's leadwithstan.com. And if you like that, I've got something else called From Chaos to Clarity. And it's just a quick assessment as a leader. If you really just want to say, what part of life is getting me down right now? It doesn't have to just be business. It can be my personal relationships, and it can be a lot of things. And so, again, I'm all about transformation as you are. But just go to leadwithstan.com if you're interested in getting any of this, and I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Great. And I'll make sure I put that in the description as well so people can find it when they listen. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was wonderful to hear your stories and to see that there's good people out there doing really good work Awesome.
Well, and you as well, Heather. Again, following you, and I loved our conversation we had last month, and it sounds like you've done some cool travel, and I'm just
Yeah.
excited to hear more about it. So anyway, I want to thank your listeners, and I want to thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here with me today. I want to tell you about something I'm really excited about. I'm leading a pilgrimage to Egypt in September 2026. We'll be visiting some of the most powerful sacred sites on the planet, doing activation work on location, and connecting with the ancient wisdom that's been held in those spaces for thousands of years. If Egypt has been calling you, if you felt that pull and wondered what it means, I'd love for you to seriously consider this. All the details are in the show notes. And if you want to experience a taste of Egypt's energy right now, we have channeled recordings from our September 2025 trip, the Song of Hathor, messages from the elders, transmissions from the sacred sites themselves. Those are on our YouTube channel, link in the show notes. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, trust what you know.